Welcome, everybody. My name is Dagmar Keim. I work at the City of Amsterdam at the Department of Urban Planning and Sustainability, and I'm very honored that we have Birgit Hausleitner here today. This webinar that we are organizing today is part of the Interact project Asset, and Assets is an Interact project which is searching for the building stones, where we try to find the building stone for a spatial strategy for a circular built environment. So we've been inviting a lot of different people to discover what is circularity, what the companies need to do for circular spaces, and we've also looked into best practices and a lot of research. Today, Birgit Hausleitner, who is a lecturer and researcher at the TU Delft, will tell us about her research. Birgit had been a co-author of Cities of Making, so you're going to tell us a little bit about this book and about the further research you've been doing on base of this book. Your research is very much focusing on urban structure research and spaces for economic activities. So I think this is a very interesting subject. This is not only relevant for the Eurodelta, this is actually relevant for all cities in Europe at this moment. So I hope that we're going to have a nice discussion afterwards. Birgit, you want to start?
Yes. Thank you. First, let me thank you for inviting me. It's always interesting to discuss the research also in a bit broader format. I actually introduced to you, starting my presentation, I introduced to you research that started with Cities of Making, but that we have the whole team been since actually enhancing, continuing in different dimensions. I've been working since 15 years in the meantime on spaces for economy, mainly in more compact cities, but gradually also I've been looking through different scales in different types of places to understand actually why and how can we also include urban production in European urban agglomerations, because we saw also in the Cities of Making that it's actually an essential step towards conditions for circularity, since the production of goods and the accommodation of flows is one of the essential aspects of achieving circularity. I am introducing to you today research from 4 projects that in the end started all with the Cities of Making project, which was an international project between UCL London, TU Delft, and the 2 universities in Brussels, looking from an industrial ecology perspective, a spatial design perspective, and a sociological perspective into how can manufacturing companies be embedded in cities, in European cities especially. An aspect that we found is very central to this story as well, which is not talked, has not been talked a lot about then, and is still a bit underdeveloped at the moment, is the affordability of cities for small scale and medium-sized enterprises, which at the moment is very much addressed in temporary spaces. And that also comes along with that their places of production, also larger scale spaces of productions, have historically been embedded in urban agglomerations, is very much in places that at the moment are competing with spaces for climate adaptive measures along rivers, for example. An important other aspect of when we speak about spaces for production is that we are confronted in a lot of European core agglomerations with space scarcity. So all land is under high development pressure, which comes along with 2 important subdimensions that lead actually through the whole project of Cities of Making. When we look, for example, at an area such as South Holland, the area that you see here, including all the space between Rotterdam and The Hague, with all the smaller towns and villages and lots of production land. Every square meter is actually already in use, and we have lots of different actors and there is not really an urban edge anymore. So one of the first ahas we got in all the interviews we've conducted with cities of making was that actually many cities operate under the assumption that let's put industries to the edge of cities because they don't impact so many different other places with maybe noisier modes of production, because in these high dense urban agglomerations, there are not really any more urban edges. So putting a strategy forward to actually think about planning space for production at the edge of cities is a doubtful one that it will work. Where we can see that also in many cities, let's say in the Netherlands, it's for sure the case, but I know also in many other European places, urban development plans are renewed every 10 years. And we have seen in many European cities that where today we might have a zoning for industrial land, the next plan 10 years later might have a different idea about that. And that creates quite uncertain conditions for industries. So they question themselves, should we invest in a certain place, or should we rather not do that because our spatial security is not given further than the 10 years, which is very often longer than the investment period industries actually have to work with. Another important aspect is land ownership. Now, when we can see that industries very often are not the most potent ones to actually compete for land, we have to think about how smart public-private corporations can shape conditions that make space for manufacturing or different types of industries more viable, where they have to compete with space for housing. There is also a lot of scarcity, but it brings more money in the land development. So the question is, let's say, how do we deal with this situation that many places do not have state or municipal or provincial owned land to steer a bit better where industries can find a place. But it also has a different aspect that when we have a lot of different actors involved in a specific place, it's not so simple to actually say, okay, we do this or we do that, but rather it's about a negotiation of different actor interests to find a common way forward. So what we actually have done in the Cities of Making project, we have developed a framework that brings together three perspectives at least. The spatial integration into higher density environments, the dimension of people, networks, and policy, and the material and technology aspect, which comes from more, it considers the circularity aspect more. But the important thing is actually we saw that if you want to facilitate manufacturing especially, we need to bring these perspectives together and see how they actually interlink. So what do, for example, the different material flows mean? What do different spaces mean in this whole ecosystem of manufacturing? And how can we align them? What we saw is that that space actually is building a mediating function because also all the more abstract and technological dimensions of looking at creating loops, they have a spatial expression. And also all financial measures or all company networks, they also are embedded or expressed in specific spaces. So we have had a look into what role, let's say, what aspects or qualities can play a stronger role in facilitating all of these processes. And that could be expressed in three main clusters of values. On the one hand, benefiting from local conditions that are important from the metropolitan scale, the regional scale, towards the plan of the city and the design of a neighborhood. But then we have also an important value that is targeting making good transitions between functions, which has a role on the metropolitan scale. That comes back to that historically we see industries are usually at the edge of cities. Since you don't have edges anymore, we have to find a way to integrate manufacturing or other types of industries more strategically in more dense environments. We have to think also how to make good transitions between functions down to the building block scale, because of course we cannot put a chemical plant, for example, next to a housing block. But then also we have to think on the more local scales, on the more, let's say, even micro scale space, on sharing spaces. And that has to do with, on the one hand, space scarcity, but it has also to do with that manufacturing spaces, especially when we go to the smaller scale and innovation and bottom-up actions, that space is not so affordable. So in high density environments, shared space is actually a way forward to make space affordable. All of these starting conditions brought us to the conclusion that we need to do two main actions. On the one hand, actually for integrating manufacturing in cities, we have to think about what's the relevance of the urban structure, the urban plan, to organize different types of urban environmental qualities, which can mediate between the different urban functions. But on the other hand, also we need an instrument that can allow us a bit more of a systemic view on actions and the relationship between these actions, and maybe also enable participatory urban development instead of looking into segregated individual actions that might trigger more conflicts. The conclusion of our project of Cities of Making was that we have put forward 50 actions that are rolled out along different scales. So on the what is here marked as the R are actually trans-color actions, which are considered more policy actions that can, for example, as the first one is making visible. We saw that actually hiding manufacturing doesn't always solve the problem. So actually making it visible and understanding, making transparent to why this is actually important, what role does it play in our society, is one step of actually enhancing the acceptance, but also making awareness that, hey, we need that. Let's look together for solutions to actually make it work. The smallest scale we looked into is actually the programming, which actually also looked into multifunctionality. That might mean, on the one hand, looking into roof landscapes that could be used for energy production, or the flat roofscapes of manufacturers to also contribute with greening the roofs, to buffering heat island effects, which industrial areas are actually very often contributing to. So there's different types of actions on different scales that we extracted from interviews with manufacturers, but also interviews with municipalities, and then in statistical analysis to actually understand how these actions are linked. To give you an idea on what such a pattern actually is, I give you one that I centrally work since with a lot of different projects, because I see it really as important aspect of spatial design. How do we understand how to put so different functions that historically over centuries have been segregated? How do we integrate them? So we look into how do we make transition zones between making and living in all the different ranges in order to align and create spatial environmental conditions that are viable for everybody. So what we did in what such a pattern involves, it's actually, it has a name. We put forward a hypothesis, that is what you see below the drawing on the left. So in this sense here, it was zones adjoining industrial areas can provide ideal space for small to medium-sized manufacturing businesses and support services that help transition into mixed use and residential areas. What we always saw is important to express what's the problem at hand, but also what's the forces that might impact that a certain action cannot work, or what might impact that a certain action actually gets strengthened. And what was also important to us is to actually make transparent that this action never stands on its own, but it can also have different ways of being realized. So, for example, a transition zone also means that I give you now one specific other pattern, that we have to think about manufacturing places need a public face. And that might mean that we have to think about the edge of an industrial area, how that actually can become more transitioning already towards the urban area, either in putting certain types of functions there, like the retail aspect of a manufacturing area, or the R&D development zones of an industrial area. But it can also mean, and that were cases we had, for example, in London, that if you have a factory that becomes a part of a city, that it doesn't have just a blind wall in the ground floor, but it actually has windows and lets a communication between inside and outside, and communicates what is actually happening there. Why is this important? Which actually contributes to the environmental qualities, but also to the acceptance and awareness of the neighboring neighborhood, that some processes are actually becoming more transparent and therefore more accessible. What is important in this relational way of looking is that when we look at actions, so we defined actions, and we also defined what is actually possible, necessary to enable, or let's say, what does a certain action enable? So, for example, continuing with these transition zones patterns. So we basically start with the assumption that developing planning and development mechanisms that allow transitions between industrial areas and other land uses. It mainly includes 3 types of gradients: scale of space, publicness of space, and degree of nuisances. And with that, we can start making different types of solutions, how transition zones are established. So that you see, for example, here on the slide on the left, right bottom, how is transition zone established. So we have, for example, varying unit sizes, um, taking advantage of place conditions. We can have making along the main streets, but we have also the back of the main street for more logistics functions. So there are complementarities, for example. But at the same time, having these transition zones that enables manufacturing in cities also enables that we have diverse jobs in cities accessible. But it also requires a curatorship and maybe a microzoning that actually allows all of these actions to happen. So you see that it's not just making transition zones will do it, but we see it enables something, it requires something, and then also it requires a diversity of different solutions to actually make a transition zone possible on different scales and in different places. We came up in the Cities of Making project in the end with 22 spatial patterns, which actually give options, but also complementarities for sharing spaces, transitions in spaces, and taking advantage of place conditions. And I would like to show you now a few concrete solutions. Going first for introducing now, there are traditionally specific places that actually have evolved. So in Cities of Making, we saw in diachronic analysis we've done over the past 100 years that's now an example from Rotterdam. Historically, small-scale manufacturing was embedded everywhere in cities. So also the machine repair workshops that at the moment is so important in circular societies, it's been gone. It's been phased out in the last, no, let's say, at least since the 1930s, more or less. And mainly the larger scale industries we found actually at the edges of cities. Still, we can find them back on what is nowadays inner urban boundaries. That might be along riverfronts, along transport infrastructure, that still sort of produces an edge, which is a bit less connected than the more central places in cities. And we find thereby three types of places. We find the inner city, the main street, and there might be smaller scale somewhere in shared spaces in the upper floors or in the backside of such inner city blocks. We have the high streets, which is now not the city center, not thinking about the Kalverstraat in Rotterdam, in Amsterdam, or the main shopping streets in city centers, but it's these old long lines which historically connect to other places, where historically also the main locations of factories have been, that still accommodate larger scale places within mixed city blocks. And then we have the business parks, which have been then designed also since the 19, let's say since the start of the last century. And we see what is their role now. Now, when we look into, again, starting with the smallest scale, the fine grain mix around the corner, that's an example from Amsterdam. Then we see the importance of actually the old industrial places, the old industrial buildings that are embedded into these mixed use regular blocks. They play an important role nowadays also for hosting small scale repair services, but also small scale production, so that we can think of smaller loops. And it's important to see that building technology here is the essential aspect to make this actually successful, so that it doesn't impact negatively the other functions, the residential layer, but also it cannot afford the location usually along main streets. So we see here in this place where you see that the number one inside, that would be the high street. Manufacturing activities, still they cannot usually afford the high street. It's changing gradually because we see lots more vacancy in high streets, but that's a different topic that I don't want to dive into now. But there are also options that it's not only the very small scale crafts which can be embedded in dense cities, but we find also examples, and that's now from Vienna, an example of a waffle factory, Manna, that actually occupies 3 city blocks. But it's actually possible to do so because the building technology manages the environmental nuisances, and keeping the granularity of the regular city grid allows us to still have even a factory of that size embedded. What possibilities this gives us for circularity is actually, in the case of the Manna factory, it actually supports the surrounding neighborhood, 600 households, with the heat that comes from the production of the waffles. So embedding larger scale factories in a way as it is done with this is, I think, is a really best practice. It's a vertical factory that runs on 6 floors, is a free condition to actually have efficient exchange of flows, in this term provide residual heat to the neighborhood. What is also important now in a lot of places where historically we would have transformed inner urban edges, so where there have been industrial locations, this is also again along a canal that has been accommodating mills, for example, but also medium-sized factories that still shows larger scale buildings. It's important to maintain those, because maintaining old buildings means it's more affordable to find places for medium-sized making, but also it means it gives the spatial conditions. For example, we see here in the hinterland of this canal, it's smaller scale buildings. In the main spaces along those canals, there are still the conditions for manufacturing. A lot of times those are actually transformed in the meantime. Now in this case, it's actually that anything from theaters to fitness centers finds their place there. But generally, keeping the spaces means keeping the conditions potentially to include manufacturing. Along the canal, unfortunately, in the last 10 years, a lot disappeared, but we still find one or the other. Zooming even a scale further out, we can see actually now that's an example from the northwest of Amsterdam, already the neighbor municipality Zaanstad, but it's still a region. Along the canal of the Sun, we find still clusters of larger industries. So that's now the case of the Olam factory, cocoa factory. The issue with this is, so sometimes in the hinterland of cities, we find industrial clusters where then the urban growth is rolling over it, we can say. So it densifies more and more. And the question is, what can we do in such cases? Very often the industries in the plans of cities, they get relocated to somewhere else. But we can also see that in what spaces, in what cases can it be successful. And what we see here in the factory in the south, there is a green buffer that actually aligns the office building of the factory and a park strip. On the other side, we have along the main street where we see the number 3, for example. It's the main street that allows for spaces of the retail. So, for example, visitor centers, anything of a sub-function of the factory, which actually aligns with the functions of the main street, that allows mitigating in a functional way between the function of the factory and the everyday street life of the main street. The point I want to make here is, let's say, we have to think also on a very local scale, how smartly we can design that actually the functions can mediate and mitigate between the different environmental milieus or urban milieus we have on the small scale. Which brings me already to the next step. It's not just about talking about the concrete places, but also thinking about the logistic routes. Because very often now when we look into urban environments and talking about the environmental categories of industrial land, it's forgotten that also the logistics routes play a strong role. So for example, now here, this is a section through the north of Amsterdam, Rotterdam and the NDSM-werf, where that is historically an industrial land. But if we transform such an area and we keep in parts industries in and transform a lot of it around into housing, it's important to acknowledge that the industries have to be accessible, which means that the routing actually through the residential areas has to be reduced it has to be limited so that we do not have too much nuisances. So it's important to acknowledge not only area development, but think at least on the city or regional scale to understand how also the traffic flows impact the other areas where it runs through and align environmental qualities. And that has so the larger scale, the big scale flows actually have always a consequence on the very local scale, that we have to actually address how the land use is actually adjacent to such flows can be organized to actually achieve good environmental qualities. One way of doing so is, and that comes from my wider research I do since years, building structure plans that can actually explain where we can expect, that's a centrality type of analysis we can do on a regional scale, where we can expect the main traffic flows and where we can expect, where we have actually the main concentrations of density. What we see here on the map in black is that it's the most central places and it's also the most dense places. And that where is the light gray transitions towards the least dense and also a bit segregated spaces. We can use such a way of urban structure thinking to align environmental qualities that go from very central to less central, high density to low density, smaller grain size to larger grain size, but also from quiet to noisy. And that is something that aligns very much to what Dan Sandbelt, in his role as National Advisor for the Physical Environment of the Netherlands a few years ago, actually promoted, what in Dutch is called, my apologies, I still mispronounce the words a bit, Reuring, Raus and Rust, what in English would be commotion, calm and noise, where commotion is more what we understand as the lively city centers. Calm means more the quiet residential areas, and noise is actually the industrial land. But what we put forward with this way of structure thinking, we can generate this for whole regions or even for the national scale. And an example I want to give you that now zooming out to the real national scale, we can use centrality understanding and the coverage of land to understand, for example, more strategically what can be the purpose of business areas. So what I've done here also in a different research project with colleagues, putting forward sort of a typology. So depending on how central a business area is and how compactly it's built up, so how large what's the share of land coverage, we can actually come to a typology. I'm not sure if my slide has changed. Can please somebody tell me if you see now what you see?
A spatial structure plan is framework to organize environmental qualities.
But do you see a matrix or do you see free maps?
We see two maps and a matrix.
Okay. So when you see, for example, now this matrix that gives an indication, thank you, Dagmar, we can say a distance from the central places, and the coverage gives us an idea if you have a high central place. So the distance to the central, the most central streets is low. And we have not so much land build up. We can think about infill strategies. And because we're very central, likely is it that an industrial area will be rather fine grain, mixed use, and accommodating much more maybe small scale repair activities. If you're further away from central places, that the likelihood is that we can, for example, provide services that, for example, relate more to energy production or that produce something that is not that should be segregated a bit more, and it can be more specialized. If we have places, no matter if they're central or less central, which have already a high land coverage, then we have to think about transformation strategies. And in both cases, we can think about doing that in a way that already anticipate circular processes. So for example, if we have more open land, there is more potential to actually store material on the site that can be, for example, then reused in different ways. But we can also think about how to clean water that comes from industrial activities. Now, zooming in a bit more again and I go a bit faster with that, spatial conditions, taking advantage of local conditions means not only considering the big environmental conditions, but for example, if you have old structures like infrastructures or height differences in other places than the Netherlands, we can think about how we smartly use those that have already a bit kind of different places, larger scale spaces, how we can use that for manufacturing, but also here the proximity to infrastructure, transport infrastructure helps us. Going more to the shared space is very important for thinking on the one hand for logistics when we see very locally that we can cluster companies to actually share spaces, but it means also making not every company having to have every component of land use that they usually would use. So for example, think also about parking, even if it's company cars, if it's sharing for loading and offloading, that can be done more collectively. We can think, as I indicated before, how to think about multiple land use for industrial buildings, to also think about environmental or other forms of production, agriculture on top of industries. And finally, we can also think about that sharing means it offers opportunity for innovation because it makes space also more affordable. And that is especially for bottom-up initiatives important. Which brings me to the last project I actually want to show you when we talk about affordability. This becomes very much important when we then turn a bit more concrete to the ladder of circularity. Thinking about the bottom-up opportunities for circularity, repair plays a very strong role. So what I've done with my colleague of Jane Klossik here, comparing also cases from London and Amsterdam, what do repair activities mean and what do they actually need is they are a key component of circular economy. When we look into cities of making, what we learned there already for repair, that we know that repair centers compete very much with other land uses that might have a higher commercial value, and especially in these areas with risk of industrial gentrification. So we know that there is microzoning necessary that can protect land in a way, and we sort of should implement reuse and repair centers that are accessible within best in proximity of high streets. Now, in this research, we also looked a step further, said why do we actually come into that repair centers should have a certain location, that to link back that there is in the meantime lots of research that says repair, if you want to use it bottom up and we want to bring it more to the customer side of the whole loop, then it has to be very easily accessible. It has to be legible that it's actually repair. And that means it has to be convenient. And what does convenience mean? It has to be super easy accessible and it has to be visible. And it, from the business perspective, has to be affordable. Now we looked also into what, when we talk about repair, what is it actually? Looking from the official business classifications, we can differentiate three types. On the one hand, the official classified repair businesses. Then second, the crafts businesses that carry out also repair services, and the community-driven repair cafes. When we talk about repair, I think it's important to also explain and link back to production, because the middle line of photos you see here gives us on the one hand a very traditional way of looking at repair. We see here textile repair, cloth repair, but the case I show you below, the bicycle that flies apart, is actually a company in Amsterdam, bicycle company Roots, that rethinks what manufacturing means, keeping repair in mind already. So to enable also companies that produce products that think of continuously keeping them in the loop, being able to update them constantly. Looking where such businesses actually find a place, again, seeing that the official repair businesses, which comparing now two industrial districts or previously industrial districts in the north of Amsterdam, and we're in the south of London. They are complete different districts, but they have both a historical industrial past. A lot of the official repair classifications are actually car industries. In Amsterdam, it's also ship repair that falls into these categories. And the crafts and repair, so when we look into where they are, the official clustered ones, the official categorized ones, very often are large units and they are in distance to central places, while the more craft and repair oriented ones, that's more closer by the consumer, they are along main streets and in mixed use buildings and in industrial plots, so they're a little bit spread. And the repair cafes are usually in central accessible places. But when we then had a look into, so if we actually consider in these districts, who has access, when we think from a consumer perspective, and we calculate or we model from every dwelling to every repair facility, then we see that in both districts, the reach, so who has access to such repair facilities, is relatively low. So all the red buildings you see, they actually do not have any access to repair. If you consider that convenience plays a role and that, let's say, walking a distance of 500 meters is convenient, then basically having not access to such repair facilities means that the right to repair, which actually should become European legislative, is actually not accessible. And that is something I want to conclude with. If you want to actually acknowledge that manufacturing in all its forms becomes a part or acknowledging the strong role it plays in the circularity narrative, then we have to give it space. And that comes along with 4 main policy recommendations that we had already developed with the Cities of Making framework, that there has to be a spatial framework that strengthens spaces for manufacturing. It protects them. We have to think about how to achieve good neighbors, which means finding strategies to avoid long-term conflicts and finding complementarities between occupants. We have to give access, which means thinking more in transport modes that are more sustainable, low carbon. And also we have to think about shared facilities, which provide access to technology and space in a more affordable way. That is what I actually would like to conclude with, and I would like to actually open the discussion. Thank you for your attention, and I invite you to a discussion on what can that mean for the regions you work with, for the cities and neighborhoods you work with, of the different places you come from.
Thank you very much, Birgit. A very interesting presentation. Please, I open the floor. Rebecca.
Hi, Birgit. Thank you for your very interesting presentation, as always, actually. I am wondering, because you also analyze manufacturing and the type of production and scale of manufacturing in relation to accessibility of the network, high streets or less accessible networks. But I wonder, what is your view or thoughts about station areas, because they are also very accessible, becoming very accessible. At the same time, also the development pressure in these areas is very high. So what type of manufacturing do you envision in these kind of accessible areas? And also, how do you ensure that these manufacturing production stays, or we can develop those productions also in these areas? Because it's always very, in my discussion with municipalities or policymakers, very hard to realize it in these kind of areas. So I wonder, what is your vision on it?
No, it's a very good question. The question comes along a lot.
Yes.
I think station areas are something really difficult. I mean, first of all, from the environmental milieu you have there, it's a highly mixed use. So already larger scale production falls out of the game. Innovation could be there if it's linked to something else. But I mean, as a short answer, 2 important considerations. If we do a redevelopment of station areas, if everything is built from scratch, is new, it's really, 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 really difficult to actually make space for manufacturing, because the spaces become nearly unaffordable. So I think what is one option is to think of smart concepts to keep all the buildings as part of the game. I think interesting places to look into are, in a wider context, if you look in Amsterdam along the Oostelijke Handelskade, where you have also in parts old buildings, because they don't need further investment, or they can go with bottom-up investment that makes manufacturing, I don't say manufacturing, let's say more crafts and innovation, and maybe more research and development oriented making possible. If we go to repair services, we can think about how to accommodate that as part of subsidized units. Yeah, for example, in talks with different developers in Rotterdam, was also very clear conclusion we got, that it could be possible to actually make cheaper space for manufacturing, again, on a smaller scale. We don't talk large factories, but we talk what can be happening within a mixed-use block. If we do not take apart investment units, but keep a larger scale mixed-use concept, where maybe a bit more expensive housing can compensate in payment for the cheaper space, making spaces. but that requires that what happens at the moment a lot when mixed-use developments, especially in highly accessible places, take place. Everything is developed and then the parts are sold, which means that the lower price units have to be viable by themselves, which they very often are not, especially if they have to pay for a high price newly developed location. So if they get developed new as a part of a completely new mixed-use area, it's only possible if you don't take away the investments, if you don't split everything up into investment units. But there is sort of overall cost-benefit thinking in a way. And that usually needs sort of incentives, I think, from governments to actually trigger development companies to actually invest in that. And I mean, we know that having mixed use means always a bit higher risk, but there are options. But I think there are no other ways. And the larger scale, when we talk about larger scale companies, doesn't matter if you think now in Amsterdam, for example, on large scale one company sites, or if you talk about, for example, thinking about in Rotterdam, the Spanse Boulder, which is an industrial area with mid-size or larger companies inside, they have to get access to high quality infrastructure. In a best case, also access to the waterfront. So the station areas, they have their limitations. Maybe they go more with innovation that can be more in mixed use developments or very small scale repair facilities, because they are important if we take the circularity ambition with repair serious, but likely they have to come along with subsidies. They are not viable by themselves.
Great. Yeah, it's
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very difficult discussion because often we see that the 15-minute city and having access to those repair cafes, also manufacturing, is part of that concept. But yeah, it's always the least type of function. It's always on the bottom of the list. And you see that municipalities struggle with coming up with financial models and subsidy models to incorporate it in a plan. So and as a designer, I can also not always come with a solution. So it's a very, very difficult topic. But yeah,
but keeping a part of the old buildings is one of the opportunities to do so. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, are there more questions for Birgit? Otherwise, I would. Oh yeah, Peter. Peter Paul.
You're muted.
Thank you, Birgit, for your interesting presentation. I work for the city of The Hague, and of course, the Binnenhof area. Yeah, we also have a part of it we want to reserve for economic activities, but we want to stimulate stacked economic buildings. The big problem is that if you want to have this, you need more heavy structures with stacked economic functions, so the costs are higher.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the revenues are lower if they are stacked.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to have low economic buildings. So it's very difficult to achieve them. But it's in the middle of the urban center, so you don't want to have low buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose this is a problem which is in a lot of cities like Paris, London, they all have the same problems. They want to have more stacked economic buildings, but they will be confronted with higher costs, lower revenues.
Mm-hmm.
Can you reflect on this? How to solve this problem to realize, because we also like to have more economic functions within urban regions, also with the recent geo-economic changes, to have more production again also in the urban regions. you need to have those stacked economic buildings.
Mhm.
How to solve this complicated economic problem?
I don't have 100% solution. There's not so much actually already built, but one option that I had also discussed with developers already, to think if you go vertical, a bit more with casco concepts. So, for example, we know that a lot of industries, they need actually larger spaces, and sometimes can also use within the company multiple floors. So one option could actually be to make this possible for developers and for municipalities. I mean, for the land use, I have really literally I have no solution for you. If you don't regulate the land price by law, there is no other solution, I think. But if inside the building there could be options, let's say, to build rather sort of skeletons with base infrastructure, and maybe always have 2 floors in one as a casco, where the companies can continue building themselves. That is one way of bringing down the construction costs, to really stripping down buildings to a way that the essence is there, and then depending on the company, which allows maybe a larger scale company or something that needs more space inside, at the same time that you could accommodate in the same space a shared format that maybe, I don't know, up to 10 companies could be in, but they build the structure and the subdivisions themselves. That is one way to actually, from the building construction mode, to reduce the costs.
Yeah.
And for the other case is again to combine land uses that actually might bring a higher income, or are partially in governmental ownership, that you can subsidize in one or the other way. Yeah, if the land, but that usually comes along with public land already.
So, sometimes you can combine it also with, if possible, with housing, which generate more revenues. This sometimes helps.
Yes, but I think the key, and I think you have in The Hague already nice examples. For example, I think the Zwarte Hond made also these plans for the central zone, if I'm right, with from Röhring, Raus Röhring Rüst.
Yeah.
To actually not think necessarily in small blocks, but a bit larger areas where you have also different kinds of transitions, that sometimes it might be offices and industries. In other places, then at the edges, you can transition with more housing. But to gradually think in a larger concept. But the main point in all of these things is actually to think in not think in investment units, in separating all the land uses, but building corporations, which is a difficult thing, I know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Birgit. This was really interesting. I think that theme of the prices of land use and housing and making affordable of these functions is one of the key elements we're also struggling a lot, obviously, also in Amsterdam. We have 3 minutes left, so I just was wondering whether you could give maybe one final statement. We've been talking very much now today on the lower level. You showed also some examples of the national level. We are doing the dissect project on the Eurodelta level, which is the Rhine-Meuse-Schelde Delta basin. I was wondering, what would you give as a recommendation for us to find spaces on such a scale?
I think it has it's not a straightforward one, because I mean, when we look at the super regional scale, we think, of course, in much longer terms. So in this sense, I think the main objective is finding what are strategic places in terms of infrastructure. So, for example, where does the energy production take place? Where is there access to mobility infrastructure on the regional scale that will be there also on the longer term? where is there potential for what kind of energy production, because industries always need more energy. And on the long term, reserve those places strategically and protect them so that they're not used for other land uses. And also see what is in their proximity to already anticipate that if other land uses, city grow closer, that already there are buffer zones where functionally we have to think about different types of land use, but also to anticipate the routing, so to have the shortest possible connections from the industrial areas towards the riverfronts, for example, or towards train systems, towards the energy production places, so that in the future we can already organize environmental conditions on the long term better, and not have to mitigate then, oh, suddenly the city grows over my land, but reserve land, you protect the places that are in such conditions and reserve buffers around them.
Thank you very much. That's a very clear answer within 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Birgit. Then I would like to close this meeting. It will be this will be recorded in a couple of days. We're uploading it on the website of the ESSA project and the Sure Eurodelta. Then you can look it back, and also your presentation will be there, Birgit. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Yeah. Thank you
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.